T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Kush's Corner here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network, the coolest reptile network in the world. Tonight is a solo podcast, just me tonight, and got a topic to go over that has become kind of viral over the past week or two. That is of corporate interest in the reptile industry and what it means for the industry, what it means for all of us, and should we be worried? Should we be happy about it? What are the implications of this? So I'm going to get into all that here tonight to kind of give my thoughts on the issue. Before we get into that, as always, though, of course, USARC. So USARC is the organization that is fighting for our rights to keep our reptiles, to run our reptile businesses, and to live this lifestyle. Check out usarc.org for everything you need to know about the organization. That website is where you can find alerts as to new pieces of legislation introduced either at the national level or at local levels, as well as alerts to progress on any pieces of legislation. Also, check out usarc.org to become a member of the organization. As a community, we have strength in numbers, and the more people that are behind the cause, the better. And here we are. Thank you to everybody who is tuning in tonight. If you are here on YouTube and you are not already, please subscribe here to the Trap Talk Reptile Network. A new podcast comes out every single day of the week from some of the best hosts in the game, talking about a wide variety of topics from within the reptile industry. So if you are a reptile podcast fan, you have come to the right place. But if you're like me and you're more of an audio person, we are also on every major audio platform, be that Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you get your podcast from, you can find the Trap Talk Reptile Network. A follow and a 5-star review on any of those platforms would be most appreciated. And if you want to support this podcast, Kush's Corner in particular, please go check out patreon.com/KushReptile. That is the new Patreon page I've dropped as of this year. Kind of a little bit of a way for you guys to support if you want to, but also 50% of all membership fees immediately become credit towards an animal. So if there's something that you've been looking at of mine, projects, particular animals, it's a great way to get kind of in on the ground floor. Patreon members get first access to everything that's available. You can go to the website, check out all the different perks on the tiers. So that would be most appreciated. So now, with that out of the way, corporate interest in the reptile industry. Definitely a hot button topic as of late. To me, it kind of came out of nowhere, although it's obviously a relevant topic. But the urgency kind of is a little bit uncertain to me as to where it comes from. So for any of you who didn't see, there were these kind of viral posts going on around social media last week, kind of a little bit of like a warning call about some of these bigger corporations that are coming into the industry and taking an interest in what we're doing. And, good points were made. So I can really kind of characterize it properly. I'm going to kind of take a look at it so I'm not misquoting. But essentially, to paraphrase the concerns of what corporations do, they find a space where there's money to be made, and due to the nature of their tactics, kind of outcompete smaller businesses, cut costs of production, kind of make it to where a small business isn't able to be profitable anymore. And aside from that, also kind of stripping the culture, so to speak, away from herpetoculture, where, as we all know, if you look around wherever town you live in, every chain looks the exact same. The design is all the same. It's all very bland. It's the nature of corporations. It's what they do. Let's see what I had written here. So yeah, and basically a direct quote from the post, basically explaining, how we get our identity essentially from the small businesses that are involved in the space. And this is about where the long-term health of the reptile hobby comes from, direct quote. So that one was kind of the most provocative line to me. It's like, okay, long-term health of the reptile industry. What exactly does that mean? And what does that entail? And what role do corporations have in said long-term health of the reptile community? So, the reptile community has grown a lot. In my lifetime, I've, watched it go from essentially a subculture to pretty mainstream, pretty acceptable, to where, in the 2000s, if somebody, if you told somebody you had a snake, a pet snake, it was kind of seen as a little bit strange, to now everybody knows somebody with a ball python or a corn snake or whatever it may be. Brian Barczyk was a huge part of that. I mean, Steve Irwin, obviously, he was, less so hobby driven the way that Brian was, but Brian brought forward, other YouTubers as well, but obviously first and foremost, Brian, normalizing herpetoculture. So that in itself is going to create a much larger influx of people into the market than would kind of naturally trickle in, to where the curve kind of steepened a little bit, which is great for all of us. There really shouldn't be anybody who sees growth in the industry as potentially a bad thing. Then I guess the nuanced discussion may become, okay, where does that growth come from, and what happens with that growth? That's a whole different story, as it would be. So the long-term health of the community, again, kind of an interesting discussion, and maybe even a full podcast on its own about, what exactly does that mean, and how do corporations play a role in that. So to me, obviously, it's a very broad discussion, but the long-term health, I kind of have three main points that I think are important in terms of that. So, the obvious one being the growth of the hobby. If the hobby doesn't continue to grow, then our power or strength stays the same. And, frankly, as a lot of us have seen over the years with different legislation that has been introduced at different levels, it's really important that we have growth, we have people, we have support for USARK, we have all of this stuff, even just awareness of our legal troubles that we're constantly facing. And that brings to the second point is legislation. Frankly, at the end of the day, we have forces that are pushing at us from the other side in the form of animal rights and in the form of real estate lobbies and, groups that really have nothing to do with our industry, but legislation regarding reptiles plays a role, like in Florida with the developers. That's probably a topic for a different conversation, but FWC is pretty much a real estate lobby at the end of the day, which is pretty sad if you really think about it. So then what helps insulate us from these legal attacks the most, for whatever it's worth? And then how do we approach that? I think that also is one of the main components of long-term health of the community. And third of that being innovation. How do we continue to improve the way that we do things? How do we continue to grow with the times? I mean, especially today, the last couple of years with the AI boom, the increase in the development of technology in the world has been just ridiculous. So, industry have to keep up, and so do we. Not necessarily that AI will be a part of the reptile industry. That's a completely different topic, but just as an example of, the growth that the world is undergoing, and we have to do the same exact thing. So there's more components to it, but those are three off the top of my head that I found were probably the most compelling. So if you look at corporate interest in what we're doing, this post was very anti-corporation, and there was a point to it, and I'm not coming here to bash. I'm coming here to offer other viewpoints and find similarities, find differences, kind of have an open forum discussion. Essentially, if anyone has comments throughout this episode that they want to drop in, I will definitely get to them if I will, even if they're contrary to what I have to say, by all means. So the negatives of corporations, and I kind of preface this when going over the post. I mean, at the end of the day, they're suits who really don't care about what this actually is. It's a vehicle of generating capital. And, we're very frequently, at least for me on my show, emphasizing how this lifestyle, whatever you want to call herpetoculture, like the last thing that should be your driving force in doing this is money, because at the end of the day, there are many ways to make a whole heck of a lot more money in the world than doing this. But then when money is the priority, the animals always suffer as a consequence. And really, they should be the main focus of what we're doing at the end of the day. So when profits and honestly, ultimately revenue are the driving force, then the animals are never going to be the priority. And no matter what, with these big corporations that are getting involved, be it Amazon or whoever else, they don't care about the animals. And we know that. That's not the discussion here. I mean, it's part of the discussion, but it's a little bit, to me, I guess, reductionist to start and end right there, because there's just more depth going on than just that here. There's a much broader conversation to be had. So first and foremost, that's the problem. I don't personally know any of these corporate people who are leading the reptile programs at any of these companies. For all I know, they could be reptile lovers, and that would be great. I just think that it's best to assume they're not and kind of move on accordingly to plan off of that. So that's kind of the first point. And then the second one, which was also mentioned in the post, which is definitely a very real thing, is outcompeting small businesses. I mean, look at Amazon. Look at like the Amazon Basics product line. It's just literally copying everything else that exists and making it cheaper. It's what these people do. And we're going to do this a little bit more in depth later, of outcompeting small businesses for the sales, for the products that they're making. Definitely a real concern, of course, as it would always inevitably be. I guess my one kind of question mark on that topic is what exactly is in question for outcompeting. What are we talking about? Animals themselves? Are we talking about feeders? Are we talking about dry goods, caging? Like what exactly is the product in question for outcompeting? I think there's a lot of nuance to go into there. And then the kind of what I said earlier about, you look around any city and all these chains look the exact same. The corporatization of the business, like losing the charm of it. And especially when from an online presence, inevitably this is what it's going to look like on these places. And you could look at that from a multitude of angles. You could look at it for one of, just our industry being the next one to be taken over by the kind of new age cookie cutter approach. Or you could also look at it as, now it seems much more palatable to the passive consumer, the person who might be going onto a website to buy stuff for their dog, and they happen to scroll across the reptile page, and it just looks very normal in comparison to everything else that is aggregated on that site. Pet stores, as far as chain pet stores go, Petco, PetSmart, whatever it may be, are pretty poor representation of the reptile hobby, especially when it comes to the animals there. Because, I mean, as anybody knows, you walk into one of these stores and you go looking at the animals that they have, and it's kind of a pretty sad reality of how those animals are living. The people who work there really don't know how to take care of them. And clearly from the top down, there isn't much of an effort to do it well. So that isn't a good optic for anybody, and it never has been. So the only thing that you could even really say on that topic is that maybe these days, with how more people percentage wise in the country are keeping reptiles as pets, and maybe some of these chain pet store workers might have a bearded dragon or a leopard gecko at home and might just feel more inclined to take better care of the animals. But then also you're working within a corporate structure. They want you to do something a certain way, and that's how it's done. So that alone is not a great look in general for us. I think I have this down on my outline to talk about later about, what if a big box store stopped carrying live animals altogether? But from an online presence, might it start to look at some point very mundane on certain corporate websites? Yeah, sure. And is that really representative of the reptile community at large? I mean, probably not. We're a pretty colorful world. Anyone who goes to a reptile show can see such with their eyes. But as far as palatability towards the new customer or the mom of a kid who's interested in snakes, maybe they found some YouTubers that they really liked and now they want to get a pet snake. I mean, me when I was 8 years old, if it seems like a much more accessible, normal, so to speak, thing, then maybe it's more palatable to the passive consumer. Another thing, let me just take a quick sip of this body armor right here. Another thing that I think is important to kind of preface this discussion by, and for anybody who's been around for a while, this is nothing new to you, but it might be new to people who are new. Corporate interest in the reptile hobby is very much not a new phenomenon. It's ramping up. There are new companies that are taking a greater interest in what we're doing. But I mean, at least for my entire lifetime, Petco, PetSmart have been very heavily involved in what we do. Pet Supplies Plus, I'm not sure when that all started, but at least where I grew up, kind of a little bit later than when Petco and PetSmart started doing all of it. But these big chain corporate box stores have always been involved in reptiles, and they've always carried live animals and dry goods, feeders, enclosures. Like, this is not a new phenomenon. So that's kind of why I wasn't super sure where the kind of sense of urgency was coming from with these posts, and like, why now? It's been a thing for quite a long time. Maybe not as long time from like an e-commerce standpoint, maybe if you want to say it like that, but all of these places still have websites, and they always have. So yeah, this is nothing new, but it's obviously still something that's important, and it's ramping up. The investments are increasing. I mean, the reptiles as a category of small pets is the fastest growing sector for sure. I mean, by a massive margin over, small mammals and birds. So of course, follow the money. That's what these corporations are going to do. I mean, at the end of the day, they're basically just kind of like venture capitalists in a way. They're not really bringing anything new to the table. They're like, all right, how do we capitalize on this clearly very strong market? And then it's kind of on us to like, all right, now what do we do with this? What do we do with all of this new interest in what we have going on? So, okay, went over some of the, am I not doing that? Yeah, let's look at I have this. I normally don't work off an outline on these episodes, but I felt like this was important enough to make an outline. So my next category is on like just big money involved in the industry. This is no small industry. The reptile industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry and has been for a while now. So it's not like this is some new phenomenon, but obviously the corporate interests are going to be able to bring more money to the table than any small business in the industry will. So inevitably that's going to be, more powerful. But then with that comes a lot more fresh eyes, a lot more new keepers or new potential keepers that are even aware of the industry to begin with and aware of the hobby. So, and is that the way that we want to bring people in? That's a different discussion. You can make an argument that might not be the best way to do it, but then how do you do it? How does it work these days? I mean, with the emergence of social media now, it's never been easier to access people. I mean, TikTok, I'm not on TikTok, even though I've been encouraged to be, but the amount of kids that spend their lives on there, like, some of these reptile videos have hundreds of millions of views, like of hobbyists. So it's going to reach people. So whether it's through the corporate chains, however they access their new people, dog and cat people going to websites and running into reptiles, whatever it may be, in my view, there really isn't such thing as a bad pair of eyes on what we're doing. Obviously, like, the animal rights people are annoying, but at this point, I feel like the culture has turned generally so far against them that it's like, I don't particularly worry about their cultural influence as much as their political influence. Because, I mean, you look at like a PETA Facebook post around, like, I remember like Thanksgiving and Christmas, like some popped in my algorithm, and like some ridiculous, frankly, kind of disturbing images of like people as turkeys or whatever. And you look at the reactions, and like the first one's the laugh reaction, and then like the angry reaction, but like angry at this post being a thing. So I think they've totally lost the plot as far as people go. But obviously, as we know now, the interest of the people and the interest of the government and the lobby interest really have no correlation whatsoever. So you can have the entire population on your side and still have to not mean a damn thing as far as legislation goes, whether we're talking about our industry or outside of it. So, that's, I mean, that might be another podcast again altogether, or maybe not even one to get into in the first place. But, that one kind of is what it is. But either way, most eyes that we're going to get on what we do are going to be ultimately for the best. So especially, the thing is, like, the corporate template doesn't really represent what we do in the most kind of true way possible, but it's very palatable. Like it's like, okay, somebody who's hesitant. Yeah, I'm just picturing this like mom with an 8-year-old who doesn't even consider that people keep pet snakes. They go onto like Amazon or Chewy and see a reptile section, then that seems a lot more palatable than like if they were to go to Hamburg or something like that as their first foray into what we're doing. So, might it be bland and boring and monotonous? Sure. Is it a little bit more palatable than it could be? Yeah, absolutely. So, for better or worse, that's that's what it is. But then as far as the opposite, or the opposing viewpoint of the big money being involved, like I said earlier, it all comes down to people who are driving the industry not actually caring about the animals, and that's always going to be a scary thought. So nothing like that is nothing to take lightly. I don't want to seem like I'm just glancing over that, because it's very much like a topic to be very wary of. Another thing I want to kind of say as a preface to a lot of this stuff is the industry has been run by bigger companies for quite a long time. Maybe not necessarily publicly traded companies, but I mean companies that are doing good 8-figure plus revenue a year and have been for a while in the industry. So, to characterize our hobby as a bunch of like hobbyist breeders, basement breeders as a term of endearment, small shops, small, Etsy store, whatever, like that's just not the case. Like it never really has been. Of course, that's a big component of it, and a very important component of it, and one that I frankly, as I'll get into a little bit, I don't think is all that threatened by the corporate interest. If anything, it actually might even be bolstered a little bit. But just to name a few, you have like ZoomEd and Exoterra. ZoomEd, new sponsor of the podcast. Thank you to ZoomEd. That have been manufacturing these products that we all use for as long as I can remember. I mean, those companies have been around for a really long time, and they've made a lot of really great products. And frankly, the industry wouldn't be here the way that it is if it wasn't for companies like those two. We look at Timberline. That's a massively successful and large company doing feeder bugs. And I mean, you can only, you look at their setups and you look at the story of it, you can put together pretty quickly what kind of business they're doing over there at Timberline. And this is all in praise. Like I'm not this is not me speaking down on these companies. This is me giving admiration to these companies. So, all credit to Timberline. Dubia, MORPHMARKET, same thing. Large scale producers of not only feeders and now this large aggregate sales site that has been used for a long time and is being innovated to change with, the way that the technology online is going these days, like a huge innovation in the industry. And big companies, when you compare them to someone like me, who is breeding snakes in their house professionally, if you want to say professionally, as a profession. And then on the other side of this are the massive scale producers. So another issue that I'll get into in a little bit that was kind of mentioned in the original post that I'm kind of responding to was of, what would happen if corporations got involved in producing of reptiles. And frankly, I mean, to preface it, I think there is zero chance of that happening. But there have been, and there still are, these handful, they're not many of them, because frankly, it's a really hard thing to do. As anybody who's had a large collection of reptiles or have managed a staff of reptile caretakers go, like, it's really difficult to mass produce reptiles. And there are many reptiles that just are not conducive to that model at all. I mean, there's a reason why these mass producers produce geckos, colubrids, ball pythons. That's kind of it. Like, that's kind of where the boat starts and ends on that. But Reptile Industries, Reptiles by Mac, and formerly Gourmet Rodent, giant operations. I mean, even BHB Reptiles, really before the YouTube kicked off and they scaled back, were producing tens of thousands of snakes a year. So, I mean, if that's not corporate production, I don't really know what is. Most of those animals were going to the big box chains, which is still what almost the entirety of their supply is. Gourmet Rodent is no longer operational, but Reptiles by Mac and Reptile Industries sure are. And that's how these big box stores get their supply. And from kind of being on that side of the industry a bit, there's always demand there. They're taking whatever they can get, these stores. So they have their pipeline. The thought of them actually getting into the production side, that's where I think like I said, I don't think there's any concern at all. And I'll explain why. So we can kind of categorize this whole discussion into a handful of different products or product types. You have the animals themselves, you have the feeders, and you have the dry goods. Yeah, there's other aspects to that. I mean, I guess maybe you can kind of separate enclosures as its own discussion, because that's kind of a one-time or two-time purchase, the way that a lot of dry goods you're going to be buying repeatedly. But those are kind of the general main categories. And the one thing that we have with our industry that makes us very unique to a lot of different business models is that our products can die, and then you make no money on them. It doesn't sound great to say that out loud, but it's just very much the truth. And to go back to, okay, you're worried about these corporations not caring about the actual animals, they're just in this for the money. Okay, well, that actually allots us a little bit of insulation from that issue, because if they are worried about the money, then they're incentivized to not get into the actual animals themselves, because that's where the least amount of money is and the most amount of potential loss. I have personal experience running a larger scale production operation in rodents, not in reptiles, but have seen firsthand the woes of managing a large scale animal care team. And it's freaking difficult. Like, it's very difficult. Like, no corporation would look at that business model and say, you're doing wonderful, we're going to dump tens of millions of dollars into this business model. They're just not going to do it, frankly. And if they do, honestly, they might outsource it to a different country, i.e. China. So, which hasn't happened really yet to my knowledge. These, you can see listings on some of these websites for frozen rodents, but they're coming from other companies, like Mice Direct is one that I think I've seen on Amazon and Chewy, with quite pricey rodents for sale. But they're a US based company. I'm not entirely sure about their supply. I know they have a giant production facility, so they're definitely producing a lot of that. But you're not seeing like Amazon rodent thing, Amazon Basics medium rat. Like, I mean, if that becomes a thing, that would be kind of funny. But then again, they're just going to be sourcing that product from an existing producer more than likely. So the animal side of it, I don't see as becoming a thing that they're getting into. And here's one example that I'll point to that really, I think, exemplifies this being the case. As I just alluded to, Gourmet Rodent was one of the major suppliers of these big box stores. They went out of business a few years ago. If it was truly, if these corporations were so concerned about live animal sales, they would not have let that happen. If that was so crucial to their business model, they would not have let that company go out of business. They would have given them a loan for whatever they needed to get it back up and running so that they can get their stock. The fact alone that didn't happen tells me that that's not really what these corporations are worried about. I mean, private breeding at smaller scales like myself of reptiles is higher than ever. I mean, go on MORPHMARKET. There are hundreds of thousands of ads for animals. And I could only imagine, obviously I don't have direct intel, but a corporation sees that and sees, okay, anybody who buys one of those could come to us perpetually for the entire time that they're involved in this hobby to buy their dry goods, to buy whatever it may be, maybe even their feeders. For anybody who hasn't learned that you don't go to the pet stores or whatever for feeders, like you could pay half, if not less than that online. It still happens. And obviously for somebody who has one pet, might not be, it's like kind of ridiculous. Okay, I have this snake that's eating a fuzzy mouse, but it's going to be eating a hopper mouse in a few months. I'm not going to buy a bag of 50 of them. Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. There's a place for it. There's a reason why it exists. If that type of product wasn't needed in our industry, the very expensive single feeder, then it wouldn't exist. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. So yeah, if these corporations were looking at our industry and saying, okay, we're going to work on scaled production of reptiles for retail sales, then Gourmet Rodent would not be out of business. So that there's that. And frankly, I'd love to see these corporations try to set up an operation to breed chameleons or green tree pythons. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be, it's going to be like the COVID ball python breeder fiasco times 100, because, the scales that these companies work at are large enough to the point of not being feasible for the practicality of the work that we do. It's not a thing. Dry goods, on the other hand, that's probably the only category where you could, in my opinion, make a really good argument that there's concern. Feeders, I don't think quite so much, especially considering the current model that these places kind of go off of sourcing from existing companies and just marking it up to a consumer that might not know you can buy direct from that company. Frankly, that probably drives even more sales to those companies than they would be getting on their own. So could it become a thing where some corporation kind of monopolizes like rodents or bugs? Maybe, but what's Rodent Pro if not that already? And then why do people go to other feeder sources? They go there because they want a more kind of, higher quality product. Why somebody would go to Whole Foods over Walmart? Like that, there's a huge push in the dog and cat food space these days for natural food. And while that hasn't really been a thing in our industry, I mean, Vitabugs from Timberline are probably as close as you can realistically say that we've gotten to that. And that product revolutionized our industry. But, there kind of already is the rodent monopoly, so to speak. So and other companies are doing just fine. I'd have to imagine that, for one, a lot of the suppliers that these corporations could try to try to solicit are already taken up by Rodent Pro. And then, if I was some corporate, crusader trying to go buy up everything, then maybe I would just try to go buy Rodent Pro instead of trying to get my own pipelines and everything like that. Just cut the line. And I mean, to my knowledge, that hasn't happened yet. So I don't know. That one I think is a little bit more up for grabs, up for discussion than the live reptile production, because you can make it a little bit more of a machine than you can breeding most reptiles. There's some reptiles like leopard geckos, or even these days like ball pythons, that you can really regiment how you do things. But as many of us know, and especially anybody who works with any sort of more obscure species, anything that's kind of closer to the wild as far as generations go, it never works like that. It really never does. And there's a reason why these large scale producers that I've mentioned have stuck to the real handful of kind of staple species they have, be it ball pythons, corn snakes, milk snakes, king snakes, leopard geckos, crested geckos. It's because those are the ones that you can produce at a large scale. And there are very few reptiles that you can realistically do that with. So feeders is a different story. There already are very large companies that maybe they're not to the point of being publicly traded large, like some of these corporations that are in discussion these days, but 50, 100 plus employee companies that kind of, you could do a little quick mental math about how much revenue these companies are generating. And we're no mom and pop industry if companies like Rodent Pro and Timberline exist. And this is not me shitting on those companies. I'm particularly of Timberline, a huge fan, just kind of to give a perspective of where this is all at these days. It's like, and it's been that way for a while. I mean, these companies have been around for a very long time, longer than I've been alive by a lot. That's let's see, what else do I have here? Another thing that is kind of a little bit of a kind of diversion from this topic, but honestly, from like an optics standpoint, I'd love to see these big box stores stop carrying reptiles, like live reptiles. Have the products, have the dry goods, have the feeders. Great. Why not? But like I stated at the beginning of the show, it's never been a good look for what we do. It really never has. Like, if these, especially still these last two, Reptile Industries and Reptiles by Mac, I have no concept of the succession plan of those companies, but they've been around for a long time. And, the people who own the companies, they're not getting any younger. So what happens if the companies kind of retire with them? What if those supplies of snakes and lizards to these big box stores kind of dry up a little bit? Okay, now what? Like, what if they can't get their supply? Do they just stop carrying live reptiles? Maybe somebody pops up as this kind of like middleman, wholesale, aggregate company for their sake. But I mean, it hasn't happened to my knowledge as of now, other than these big companies. So these big producing companies. So, we'll see on that. But I really would say that from an optics standpoint, man, I would put my vote in for, let's have these big box stores stop carrying live reptiles. Leave that to, frankly, to mom and pop stores and to the internet. For better or worse, that's where it is these days. A lot of the times, and this is another probably discussion as well, but a lot of the times reptile shows, especially some kind of smaller reptile shows, aren't the best visual representations of our hobby, as far as how some people just choose to display their animals. And, to be very blunt, some of the ways that vendors present themselves is a very poor, optic. Go to a show like the Reptile Super Show or Tinley Park, NARBC, and you're going to see a lot of very professional vendors, and that's what we want. But go to some smaller shows, you're going to see quite the different look. So if we're able to kind of curate the appearance from an online standpoint, as opposed to relying on Petco and PetSmart to be the front lines of this is what reptile keeping is, optically, I think it works a lot better for us. If we get to a point where some of these corporate websites or whatever have the way they portray the reptile sections, very professional, very corporate, bland, nothing much going on there. Cool, fine, whatever. I'll take it. That's not the end of the world. It's better than it could be. It doesn't have much character, no, but do we need character in that sense? Like, does that even matter when it comes to a corporate website? Like, does it matter if they are portraying themselves in a way that accurately represents the reptile community at large? I don't know. I'm not sure I would say that whatsoever. And then if the portrayal of the hobby can mostly be driven by online, and look at TikTok and look at Instagram. A lot of the biggest influencers these days. I mean, look at Armin from Herp Time, for example. His enclosures are immaculate. I mean, the way that he takes care of his animals are top tier. Like, that's a great representation of what we do. So if somebody like that is a pair of, like, where a new pair of eyes can go early on, we're golden. We have legitimacy through these corporations, and then we have a good face forward online. I mean, I don't know, we're limited by the mediums that we have access to, but again, the world is the world that we are currently living in, and we're kind of, somewhat forced to work within those confines. We could try to paint this idealistic picture of, what we'd want this to be, but it's just not going to happen. I mean, at the end of the day, we're people with snakes in our houses. Like, sure, is it more normalized now than it used to be? Yeah, but is it still something that I don't want to say most at this point, it used to be most, but a lot of people might have kind of reaction to right away? Yeah, we're still fighting the uphill battle on the way that we're perceived. So I feel like almost anything that we can do that kind of takes the edge off of that a little bit is going to be, for the best at the end of the day. And maybe even in the process become more professional as an industry ourselves. Like, what about that? Not to say that the corporate way to go is the way to go, but like, what if this is a wake-up call to become a little bit more professional ourselves? Still keep some of the character and the authenticity that makes this hobby so great, but button it up a little bit more, maybe. I don't know. And that's can be a totally different discussion again altogether. But I think we could look at it from both sides on that issue. So take another sip of this here, body armor. Thank you to everybody who is popping up in the live chats right now. Most appreciated. So, all right, let's see. Back to my outline. So I guess to look at just straight positives of corporations, and some of these will be, points that I've repeated earlier, kind of looked at what would be seen as some negatives that, debatable or not, are definitely have negative components. And then these, debatable or not, are most certainly positives. And so the first one would be safety against legislation. I kind of prefaced that at the beginning. Man, I think this might be the biggest plus in this whole discussion about corporate involvement in our industry is protection against legislation. I think the immediate contrarian opinion to this would be that they're not going to fight for us. And my response to that would be, I don't think it really matters. I agree. I don't think that some of these corporations are going to go up to bat for the reptile industry if it comes down to it. No matter who decides to dump a bunch of capital into a reptile industry project from a corporate standpoint goes, it's going to be a very, very minuscule percentage of their overall business. So if shit hits the fan, they're going to drop us as quick as they picked us up. So I have no, I have no delusions about that. So let me make that very clear. I don't think that they love us. I think they find a very, I want to say convenient, but a new potential profit generating source as what they do. They're these corporate crusaders. But with that said, as we all know, the only thing that matters when it comes to lobbying, legislation, politics in this country, the absolute, one of the only things that matters is money. And the more money that is, the more money that is behind us, ultimately, the more insulated we will be from all that stuff. Will it insulate us completely? No, definitely not. Political climate plays a huge part of it, whether anybody wants to admit it or not. I mean, without even having to pick a side, so to speak, you just look at the track record of national level bills introduced during the presidencies of Democrats versus Republicans. In January of 2021, we got an onslaught of new legislation, both at the national level and at many different local levels, and that was no way a coincidence whatsoever. They were biding their time, they're biding their time, these animal rights groups, to get their bills out there, and right as it was more advantageous for them, boom, they hit us. So it's always going to happen. Again, huge shout out to USARK. Really, from all of that, nothing really stuck. All the shit they threw against the wall just slid right down. But it sticks until it doesn't stick until it does. Like we can't just sit back and say USARK will take care of it, which the thing is they do, but nothing is going to be helped by not being proactive when it comes to that. But no matter what, no matter the political implications of it, the more money that we have behind our industry, the better, whether it's going to actually fight for us directly or not. At the end of the day, we live in a capitalist society, and there are considerations made for businesses, for, legislation that will lead to a decrease in tax revenue. Let's not forget about how much our government loves their tax revenue. And this industry is a pretty good generation of tax revenue. So that's not something that they want to just shut down for the most part, unless somebody is either ideologically captured or captured by special interest, which frankly happens all the time. But I don't have numbers on this. I can't imagine that animal rights have a chokehold on any sort of large proportion of politicians, especially nationally. So, that's just my take on that. Is I don't think we should really complain about money, especially if it's not coming from some like real terrible place. I mean, it's a corporation. Yeah, whatever. It's just a bunch of suits in a building. Like, okay, fine. If the money is behind us, if we can have a little bit more insulation, hey, I'll take it. And then, another thing, if they're investing into their infrastructure to be a part of our industry, then that's just more capital flowing in our market. And, a higher volume of money flowing through our industry will just mean more potential money for everybody who's involved. And man, argue that that's a bad thing. I would not be able to potentially make an argument how that's a bad thing for any of us. I guess you could potentially argue about, okay, what if that becomes the overarching priority? This is just a money grab for people at the end of the day. If it brings in a lot more people who are not into it for the animals, but as that might be, as we have seen historically, that mindset, it burns out real quick when you're working with live animals. Look at ball pythons. Need I say more? So I don't know, that never worries me too much, because in execution, it has never actually posed a real threat to what we do. it's very unfortunate in the process, and you shouldn't wish for it, because at the end of the day, the animals will have to, be compromised for that reason. But as far as compromising our industry goes, it really has never had that major of an impact. If anything, some of these instances have really kind of been moments to reflect on, like, why we're doing this, and then also being more proactive to prevent that type of thing from happening, being more protective of what we're doing. And then you could very clearly turn that around and say, okay, well, if we're being protective of what we're doing, we should be pretty concerned about these corporations. And that would be a valid argument as well. So I'm not going to necessarily fully shoot that down. Like I said, this is not me shitting on this original post. This is just kind of an expansion on what I think is a very multi-layered discussion. So, all right. So yeah, and this another couple of points, just, man, same of the visibility, accessibility to new people, new eyes. We went over all of that, the normalization of the industry. And then, once again, the flow of commerce, and, the flow of the eyeballs, the flow of where the world is going from that standpoint is online. And, these, I mean, look, like Amazon, I don't have numbers, but it has to be like the most visited website in the entire world. So if the most visited website in the entire world has a reptile section or whatever it may be, or a lot of reptile products, well, man, I can't think of a way that more eyes would get on reptiles than through a means like that. And then, again, like, just the legitimacy of it being on Amazon. That's, anyone can get on Amazon. That's not a huge feat, frankly, as anybody who uses Amazon would know. Some very sketchy shit on there. But the fact that they would have like an actual vested interest in what we're doing, I think ultimately probably brings more pros and cons. So again, as this is happening, any concern about this, I think you really have to kind of take a step back, take a more historical look at the hobby. You could really analyze just about anything this way, just with how things change with the times. But man, our industry, for as young as it is, has gone through some absolutely massive overhauls as far as, how things are operated. I mean, from the early days of the price list and I way too young for this, but the whole like self-addressed stamped envelope phenomenon of the day of, you send one of those to somebody who you got a price list from with like, hey, this, and this, here's a check. And, or like that, or they maybe sent you Polaroids, whatever, however that worked out in practicality. From that to the internet being a thing, to email being a thing, to where you don't need to wait for the snail mail system to send your letter. You can, email. I'm not sure if they were still around by then, but like, like Hank Molt back in those way back days, I was probably gone before email, but like, that was how one acquired reptiles, was by going through one of the few importers, or Strictly Reptiles or Calzoo or any of these importers that were like at the foundation of our industry. And now these days, you go on MORPHMARKET. From that kind of came the forum days, be it King Snake and Fauna, the old Morelia Pythons forums and Morelia Viridis forums, the innovation of that as far as bringing people together, having a kind of more direct to consumer, easy way to connect with people, an easy way of making sales. And then from there, now we're looking at YouTube and the early days of social media like Facebook. What used to be, cable TV shows now became these much more accessible, kind of much more real YouTube videos that were a shorter format, typically speaking. And, you watch Steve Irwin, you're going to get potentially inspired off of that, but like, you're not going to learn how to keep a reptile. But look at snake bites. Look at a lot of the early channels that were doing YouTube content, you know, that absolutely revolutionized the space. And, you know, these aren't necessarily, you know, corporate interventions, but this might just be the next real evolutionary step. And you know, again, two companies that I'll give a shout out to here for really like excelling in what we're doing here is Josh's Frogs and Triple L. Just these fairly large scale dry goods companies that, you know, Triple L still runs storefronts. I can't truly remember if Josh's Frogs ever was a storefront. Well, I believe they were. I don't believe they are anymore. But that's a small business turned into a not so small business anymore. That's not corporate and does huge volumes of sales. I mean, they are one of the most successful companies in the history of our industry, and you know, really should be a case study that a lot of us should look at. Is like, wow, that's pretty amazing that was able to be done just based off of this hobby, and in their case, you know, like mostly amphibians. So, you know, that's a pretty huge success story right there. But then being early in the days of online retail, of e-commerce, before that term was probably even coined, of, you know, you need supplies, you need feeders, you need whatever it may be. Hey, cool, here's this one-stop shop for all of this stuff. And were they potentially out competing some local mom and pop shops? Maybe. I mean, you could probably make some arguments yes. You could probably make some arguments no. I mean, the fact that Triple L has had their storefronts in California for as long as they have definitely points towards the success of those storefronts, especially considering they're in Southern California, of all places, like the most expensive place in the country. So there's no way that that's a cheap operation to run by any means. I mean, even the property taxes alone have got to be more than the overhead of some pet stores in, you know, more remote communities. So it can be done. And that's, I think, an ultimate point I'm making here tonight, is that, you know, out competing from these corporations, I would say you got to be worried about it if you're not willing to innovate, if you just want to stay static and stagnant with what you're doing. Two pet stores that I'm going to shout out as far as who I think are doing it at just the most high level possible. One, I would say Metazotics, Clint Bartley, and two, DFW Reptarian, David Spicer. In their communities, they are killing it. They're doing fantastic. I don't think that either of those guys are worried about Amazon and Chewy whatsoever taking away their customers. And frankly, the way they're doing it is by providing a very high quality experience, a place people want to come back to. I mean, when people go to like this NARBC in Dallas, like going to the DFW Reptarium is a destination for people that are coming in from out of town. It's a pet store at the end of the day. Sure, do they have a more significant kind of display aspect to it and kind of a little bit of a reptile zoo aspect to it? Of course, but it's a pet store. And I'm not using that as a pejorative. I'm like, that is what this business model is. Nothing, I don't want to say nothing, but like, they did it. What's stopping any other pet store from doing something along those lines? What's stopping a pet store from being like Metazotics and opening multiple locations because their first one's doing so well and they want to capitalize on more of the market? You know, look at these big box stores. There's still Petcos and PetSmarts everywhere. And if the online competition was so strong that those business models weren't working, as we have kind of continued to say throughout all of this, like, if the money is what they ultimately care about, which obviously it is, if those storefronts weren't working, they'd shut them down because that's all they care about. So clearly they're working because they are still there and they're in every city in the United States. You know, oftentimes multiple in every city in the United States. So anybody who gets, you know, looks to local stores for their products, man, if you have a good reptile shop in your area, that's probably going to be where you go, as opposed to Petco, PetSmart, Pet Supplies Plus. And frankly, a lot of the times you can get better prices there. One of the, you know, kind of nice things about that model is you can kind of reduce your overhead more than some of these corporate places can, especially with all the big executive salaries and their marketing budgets and a lot of that stuff. Like, they're very much regimented as to what they can do. When you're an individual store, you have a lot more wiggle room of how you run your business. So especially when it comes to feeders, man, you're not going to find feeders cheaper at Petco than you're going to find at your local reptile specialty shop. Like, it's just not going to happen. And a lot of the time they're even the same bugs. They're coming from Timberline, or, like, they're coming from the same places. So, from the standpoint of the stores being out competed, I'm not saying it's not a concern. 100% is. That's the business model of these corporate crusaders, is to take out the smaller guys, take the market share for themselves. But the thing that smaller scale stores can do that these corporations can't do is be innovative, be ahead of the curve, do things that set themselves apart, because you're going against a cookie cutter. It's pretty damn easy to be more unique than a cookie cutter. So that's what I would say to that. Got a whole lot, no, I mean, not a whole lot more. We're kind of definitely in the second half of this. We've hit the hour mark, so I'm going to go run some commercials real quick. But sit tight, everybody. We'll be back here in a few minutes with some more of this conversation.
Sorry for the interruption, folks, but a quick word from our sponsors. Shout out to tonight's sponsor, and that's the one and only Morph Market and Morph Market Shipping. One of the biggest exciting things about the reptile hobby over the past couple years is Morph Market Shipping taking everything to the next level. Anything as far as reptile purchasing or selling needs can all be done on Morph Market's website, so I highly suggest you go check it out, especially if you're in the market of purchasing your first, second, or third, or fourth reptile. You can find a bunch of legitimate breeders on Morph Market's platforms. They stand very tall on representing the best breeders we have in the hobby, so don't look anywhere else when it comes to looking for your new reptile. Not to mention, if you're looking for aquatics or your next plant, Morph Market's a spot for you as well. Make sure you head over to morphmarket.com, and the best thing about Morph Market's platform, you could ship directly from their website with Morph Market Shipping. Morph Market Shipping has saved this hobby billions of dollars as a whole. I myself saved thousands with Morph Market Shipping last year due to their insanely cheap rates, so definitely go take advantage of these rates on top of the amazing customer service that comes along with Morph Market Shipping. Shout out to Darian and Zach, and shout out to the entire Morph Market team. So proud to be a part of this team. Thank you so much for Morph Market Shipping and Morph Market. So excited to announce this partnership, and so excited to announce new Morph Market features that are going to be hitting the reptile hobby real soon, like live sales on Morph Market. Thank you so much, Morph Market and Morph Market Shipping. Sorry for the interruption, folks, but a quick word from our sponsors. Shout out to tonight's sponsor, brought to you by ZooMed.
ZooMed is proud to be supporting the Trap Talk Reptile Network. At ZooMed, reptiles are our passion. For over 48 years, we've been creating premium foods, supplies, and habitats for reptiles and other exotic animals. We're a company made up of hobbyists that test our products on the hundreds of animals that we care for here every single day. Whether you're an established breeder or a first-time hobbyist picking up your first ball python, ZooMed has you covered with everything you need to keep your animals happy and healthy.
I'm excited to talk about this new product with ZooMed called the Slither Sense. It is a remote temperature and humidifying monitoring system, which we all know how important temperature and humidity is to your reptile, and for you to have remote access to your temperature and your humidity in your reptile room could really be a game changer for the longevity of you keeping reptiles. So guys, make sure you check out that product. Find the link in the description below. Click on it right now. Give me your feedback in the comments below. Let me know how you're liking a brand new ZooMed product. Sorry for the interruption, folks, but a quick word from our sponsors. Shout out to tonight's sponsor, Workshop Reptilium. Josh Hansen is doing things different over in his facility. He has one of the most diverse, beautiful reptile collections currently in the reptile hobby today, but he is doing things differently when it comes to enclosures, thinking outside the box, giving these reptiles bigger enclosures. I feel like it's something this hobby needs. So a lot of exciting stuff to come from Workshop Reptilium. I'm going to be flying up to his place to give you guys a deeper look into his facility, and I'm also excited to have an episode with Josh so he can explain himself where his goals are headed when it comes to keeping. Thank you so much, Josh Hansen over at Workshop Reptilium. Make sure you head over to Instagram, make sure you head over to Facebook. Also, make sure you subscribe to him on YouTube. You can find all the links in the description below. Again, thank you so much, Josh, over at Workshop Reptilium.
Alrighty, we are back. So definitely kind of in the wind down phase of the episode. But, I think I've said a lot of what I have to say on the topic. I think at the end of the day, and I've kind of, alluded to this a little bit, when it comes to, Calvin, when it comes to being in a marketplace where you're competing with corporations, what it ultimately comes down to is how you stand out, how you become unique, how you attract an audience that isn't just looking for, okay, how do I spend the least amount of money possible or whatever, where they're ultimately looking for a high quality experience, for good customer service, to support somebody who they believe in. I think that these days is actually a pretty big part of the marketplace in general. There's a lot of people out there who support themselves as, a small business, just as one person. And a lot of that comes down to developing a support base. Look at a lot of, content creators, look at like YouTubers and streamers, a lot of them aren't running some big corporation. They're maybe at some point have gotten big enough to hire like camera people or a couple employees or whatever. But the organic reach is it's a very, important part of life these days. So as far as that goes, you just got to change with the times, for better or worse, evolve with where the attention is, evolve with how to get new eyeballs on what you're doing, how to stand out, do something unique, do something that other people aren't doing. If you want to look at reptiles in particular, find a species, a genus, a group of animals that you're particularly passionate about that are being underrepresented. Just to use myself as an example, I did that with scrub pythons, and it served multiple purposes because, one, I found truly the animals that I love the absolute most and realized that there's a niche in the hobby that they could fill that didn't really have anything at the time to fill it, or kind of there were gaps. And then I get to work with my favorite animals, and I get to tell other people why they're so amazing. So it all works out in synchronicity very well in an instance like that. So that's doable in many different ways. There's a lot of artists who make a living within the industry of just being very good at what they do, having very beautiful art, doing custom work for people, do whatever it may be. Man, it'd be really hard for me to imagine a world where somebody wants some reptile art and they're going to go to Amazon, or they're going to go to Chewy before they're going to go to somebody off Instagram who they found whose work they really love, like Renee Baskin-Coyle or Adeline Robinson or anyone like that. I just don't see that happening. The same way that I hope, I don't know anybody, but like AI music, okay, sure, does some of it sound like music? Okay, yeah. Could you trick somebody with AI music? Yeah, sure. But there's no soul in it. It's just this blank, empty vessel that is imitating this thing that we all like so much. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what these corporations are as well. But that doesn't mean that they're universally bad. It's kind of have like a live with it situation, make the best of it, and reap the most benefits. But then at the same time, man, it gives you such a leverage point, to be more unique, to be an individual, to stand out. It's not very hard to stand out over a corporation. Might it be hard to get those same eyes? Sure, but attention is the most accessible it has ever been in the history of the world these days. So there isn't a ton of an excuse not to garner that attention. You might just not be very good at it, but they're very kind of concrete, laid out, direct steps these days as to how to do that. So in my eyes, there's no excuse. I guess it wouldn't be an excuse, but if you don't want to do it, then that's a whole different story. But then I guess don't complain if you're struggling and not actually putting the relevant effort in. So I don't know, man. That's let's see, what else do I have written down? We're right here at the end. We really are right here at the end of the episode. But yeah, so I guess, to aside from reptiles themselves, the actual animals, some examples of some small businesses that are standing out as far as like kind of types of businesses within the industry, like custom enclosures. corporations will never get involved in the custom enclosure business. And why, you may ask? Because it's not a profitable business when it comes to pure efficiency. Sure, might you be able to sell a heavily customized enclosure for more money? Yeah, absolutely. How much more time does it take to customize that enclosure? And if you were just making stock enclosures, how many more of that model could you have manufactured in the meantime? The profit margin decreases immensely when you get into customization. They will never do that. But the customizable caging companies will have that market fully to themselves at that point. And not that they haven't already, but something like that. So, might you be working against enclosures that are manufactured in China and kind of, flipped for the most minimal profit in the US possible? Sure. But the same way that if you want a ball python, you're probably, unless you don't know any better, which can be the case, but man, these days, I can't imagine that people who are looking into their first ball python that have access to the internet are going to Petco or PetSmart before they're going to a site like MORPHMARKET to look for that first ball python. So the same way, like cheap, poorly manufactured Chinese reptile enclosure compared to very high quality, US manufactured reptile enclosure. There's a reason why some of these companies do as well as they do. I guess I'll say that much. When it comes to feeders, is that going to potentially be a problem? Yeah, sure. I think there's a world where these corporations get a little bit more interested in feeders. Dry goods is obviously the main thing that they're going to be focused on because you can stock them. You can put them in warehouses. Feeders, not so much, especially when it comes to live feeders like bugs. Man, I can't see a world where corporations get into live rodents. I really can't, even if anything from the optical standpoint of it. Shoot, you go to a Petco and a PetSmart, they won't sell you a rat or a mouse that they know you're going to feed it to a snake. So that would be almost a 0% chance. But frozen feeders, sure. Obviously, it's much more expensive to store a product in a giant walk-in freezer that requires a constant large power supply as opposed to a rack in a warehouse that may or may not be air conditioned depending on where it is. So that's going to ultimately be the main, and this is, it's where they've always been. It's the space of the industry that they've always been, is in the dry goods. And even like books, like I'm not even sure I would be worried about them being involved in selling books. Frankly, because I don't know how big of a part of the hobby it even is anymore, as unfortunate as that might be. But the dry goods, the bedding, and the lights, anything that require multitude purchases over and over again, that's going to be where they, are going to try to capitalize the most. So if they get into feeders, okay, let's kind of play that situation out as if it were to happen. No matter what, it's going to be a very kind of standard, non-special product that they're selling, because it's going to need to be scaled and more than likely just sourced. So somebody could gain a very easy competitive edge by just producing a higher quality feeder. And by whatever metric you want to consider higher quality, be it fresher, fed a better diet, or whatever it may be, or you could offer to people locally to where they know that bag of rats hasn't been sitting in a freezer for 15 months, the way that you're not 100% sure whether or not they have been, if you buy from any online retailer, corporate or not. So, and ultimately, all of it comes down to marketing, and it comes down to just being a good being a good promoter, talking about yourself. being willing to put yourself out there a bit. That's where the world is these days. You know, whether you like it or not, like the world is on social media. And a lot of these corporations are investing in that. You know, ads on these platforms have gotten more expensive. You know, look at YouTube ads. It's you know, it's TV ads now. They're just on YouTube now. So it is what it is, but at the same time, there's still organic reach available to the rest of us, and it's easier than it has ever been. So yeah, Calvin makes a great point. If you're looking into your first ball python, get a scrub instead, says the guy who's selling all his scrub pythons. But I digress. So yeah, I mean, if you're not willing to change with the times, then sure, this might be an issue for you. If you're willing to innovate, stay a step ahead of the curve, and frankly, be a business person, I think you could actually utilize this influx of corporate interest as a point of leverage to actually increase your own business. And as a consumer, you don't have to use these corporate people. You don't have to go to these businesses to get your supplies. You know, you can vote with your dollar or vote with your attention at the end of the day. And, you know, money is at a premium these days, very much so. So, you know, to be able to save 10, 15, 20% on a regular good that you buy is frankly very important. I know it's something that I consider on a daily basis. So it's a consideration in both ways, but at the end of the day, something you like, there's something you don't like, vote with your dollar, vote with your attention. So that is that. Hopefully this is a conversation that doesn't just begin and end here. You know, I'd love to do an episode with somebody who maybe has a strong stance against what I said here tonight and kind of have a little bit of a discussion. I think no matter what, though, we're not going to get anywhere by avoiding these kinds of topics. So to broach them in a kind of collected way where you're, you know, not just married to your opinion, is going to be good for all of us. So yeah, just the beginning, hopefully. And, you know, let me know what you guys think. You know, leave a comment, or if you want to message me, by all means, I'm, you know, more than happy to continue this dialogue. So yeah, there's the episode. Thank you guys for watching. I guess since it's a solo, I'll just do my plugs here at the end. Instagram, Scrub Shepherd, right there. You can find me, Stephen Kush, on Facebook, Kush Reptile on MORPHMARKET, and on YouTube. I drop vlog style videos every single Friday over on my YouTube channel, Kush Reptile, and then also my new Patreon page, patreon.com/Kush Reptile. Go over there, check it out. It's the best way to support everything that I'm doing. And I very much appreciate anybody who decides to support me over there. And if you don't, I don't care either. So, you know, appreciate it no matter what. But if anybody feels like it, it does mean a lot. So, but yeah, thank you to everybody who has been supportive of me through my journey and all of this. It makes it so much more enjoyable, so much more rewarding. You know, I've said before, the love of the animals takes you a long way. To be able to share it with others, that really kind of brings it all full circle. So whether it's these podcasts, you know, Instagram, and especially shows, man, what a fun industry, what a fun hobby we're in. All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in to this episode. Appreciate everybody who watched, and I'll catch you all back here next week for a new one.